Hey guys, Jim from the McMahon Center, School of Communications. Today we're going to talk about the Sony FS-5. This is very much the workhorse, kind of go-to narrative, documentary, kind of all things camera. So what I want to do first is kind of pop into the menu. We'll talk about how the menu works, and then I'll talk about the body of the camera and other functions. So let's check out the menu of the camera. I'll open that up. All right, so let's kind of go in order of this. We'll go through everything so you guys know what to do. So I'm hitting the menu button. The first thing I come up to is this camera paint option. Let's go into here and run through the menu. So first thing we see here is ISO or gain select. This is basically asking, do you want to use ISO as a function of how sensitive the camera is to light, or do you want to use gain? ISO is a lot more focused. You can really dial that in a lot better than gain. So that's what we're used to in the industry. Let's stick with ISO. If for some reason you wanted gain, you could just select that there. But I'm going to select ISO. That way we can dial it in and be consistent throughout our project. So ISO gain is set. We're good to go. Let's go to ISO set. So on the Sony FS-5, we have 3 different settings, and you can change all these. Basically, we have a high, a medium, and a low ISO. Remember when we talk about cinematography, the lower the ISO, the cleaner the image. Sometimes you might be in some place that's really dark. You can't get lights in there for some reason. You might have to bump up the ISO a little bit. But for the most part, let's keep our ISO as low as we can go. So right now I'm in my low setting here, the L for low. I'm going to click the wheel to go into the menu. We see that our lowest ISO setting is 800. If I were to scroll this up, you can see how the ISO is getting affected, blowing out. It does go very high, but you'd never want to use these settings. So let's set our low to 800. Let's do a medium. Let's say 1,000. And then let's do a high. This high is kind of for emergency situations. Maybe you're shooting in a cave for some reason. You can't get lights, I don't know, for whatever reason. Let's set this to 1,600. That's kind of the highest I would go for ISO on this camera. So now you have these high, medium, and low setups. I'll show you when we get to the camera body how to go through those. But now you're set up, and we'll go through the rest of the menu. We're not using gain, so we don't have to worry about that. Let's talk about white balance preset. So the FS-5 has 3 different kind of white balance selections that you can go through. What it kind of does, it breaks it down. It can make it easy for you guys. If you know you're shooting outside, you want to do just outdoor, you can set the white balance preset to outdoor. If you're shooting just indoor, for some reason maybe you'd want to use this. I would never want to use either of these. I recommend that you guys always stick to this manual white balance temperature. This is where you can really dial in exactly the look of your film, exactly what should be white. Say you're shooting something that you want to look like moonlight, and you only have tungsten lights. You don't have any blue gels. For some reason you forgot to bring them to set. This is where you could dial your white balance to a manual setting. Make sure that everything in the image looked blue, although to your eye it wouldn't look blue. So let's stick with manual white balance temperature. We'll talk more about this when we get to the camera setting. We're not using these outdoor settings or white balance temp set. We can set that all on the camera, so don't worry too much about these. And then we'll talk more about ND filters, but the FS-5, a great thing about the FS-5, it has built-in ND filters. ND, think of kind of sunglasses for your camera. And these are all very changeable, but it does have 3 presets that you can run through. So say you're shooting outside and your iris is all the way closed, but you want to have that really creamy cinematic effect. Maybe you're at an F11, you want to get down to an F2 point something, 2.5. With ND filters, you can cut down the light and get to that f-stop that you desire. We'll talk more about those later. Scrolling through, the rest are kind of all user-friendly buttons that you can go through. Not super important. I want to talk about the slow and quick button while we're here. I'm going to pop that on, click through these. FS-5, again, another really cool function. It has slow motion, it has super slow motion. So it has what it calls a S and Q, kind of a slow and quick, and then a super slow motion that you can access right on the camera. So say you're shooting sports and you want a function that's really slow motion, you can do a super slow motion with one button click. Maybe you're shooting something that's just, you want 60 frames per second. So not super slow down, but a good kind of smooth, creamy thing. You can set your frame rate to 60 frames per second here in the slow and quick, and then go down to your super slow motion. We have this set up as 120 frames per second. You can go into that and change it all around. It goes 960 frames per second. You do lose a little bit of bit rate when you go that way, but a lot of cool functions on this camera. I'd recommend going up to 120 seconds. That's more than enough frames that you need for some cool slow motion effect that you're doing. You can set up this recording time. So say you're say you're shooting some kind of wildlife or animal thing, and you're just waiting for this animal to move and a bird to fly away, you can set the recording timing to end trigger. So that way, if the bird flies away, you're like, okay, I'm gonna hit record now. It'll take a couple seconds before you hit record. So it's kind of constantly recording, which is a cool thing. You can also change this to start trigger or end trigger half. So it'll take kind of 4 seconds before, 4 seconds after. Definitely mess around with these settings. They're really cool. A lot of cool stuff about this camera, which is great. So we'll head out of this menu. The last thing I'll talk about in this camera setting is picture profiles. So the FS-5 has a lot of different picture profiles. You can see as I scroll through these, has a bunch of different profiles. When we get to picture profiles 6 through 9, these are kind of the log formats. You guys can definitely mess around with these log formats if you want something that you can give you a lot of dynamic range. You can edit down later in post, make it look really good. The only thing I'd warn you guys is some of these log formats, it'll bump the ISO way up, and you might not want that. You'll get a little more grain than you prefer. So what I would say is just shoot with this camera with no picture profile. So keep it off, keep it raw, kind of right through the camera. And as you keep using it, if you feel like you want a little extra out of your camera, then try some of these picture profiles. But definitely mess around with them. But for the most part, I would say kind of use it off and light as best as you can and try and get the best image in camera beforehand. All right, moving on. Let's go down to this record out set. So this is where we can record, choose how we want to record our project. So big thing you should go into when you first get the camera is, how do I want to shoot this? Do I want to shoot this HD? Do I want to shoot this huge? I want to shoot this more on a 4K, a 2K kind of scale that this camera does. So under this file format, if you want to shoot the bigger option, that's this top option, XAVC QFHD. So this is kind of the FS5's Ultra HD. I just selected that. So now if I go to my record format, you can see this is a higher frame, higher recording format at 2K almost, 2K 24 frames per second, 100 megabits per second, which is great. Really cool option to choose that on. Say you don't have a lot of storage, you're like, I don't want to have as much time, I don't have as much time to edit or to work with this, I just want to shoot this in HD. I would choose the middle option here, which is XAVC HD. So let's select that, and there's a couple different frame rates you can choose throughout this. So top, if you guys are doing something in slow motion, you want to shoot 60 frames per second. Remember, P is more for progressive, more for film. I is something for sports or for TV, television. So definitely stick with the P option. So what I would recommend is shooting at 1080, 24p, 50 megabytes per second is kind of the strong go-to option there. So this is good to go. You're kind of set up, ready to shoot in HD. You feel good about it. This great thing about it, the FS5, it has 2 card slots on here. So if you want to shoot your footage simultaneously, you want both cards to be recorded for some reason. Maybe you're worried that you might lose a piece of footage, or it happens. So a good option on here is you can turn on simultaneous record. So it records everything that you shoot onto 2 separate cards. Just to be safe, it's a great option to do that. Also gives you the option to shoot in a proxy mode. So say you're shooting in the 4K option, but you don't want to deal with the high quality of the footage. Maybe your computer is a little slower. You can choose this proxy mode, which will give you smaller files to work with, and then you can replace those with 4K files towards the end. So a lot of really cool options so far within this FS5, a lot of things to work with. That's pretty much the most part on recording. We'll talk quickly about audio. 2 inputs on this camera and an internal mic. So if I'm shooting something, some kind of interview, documentary, a lot of times I'll put channel 1 input on the internal mic. Now you can see, you can hear us now. We have some levels there. And then I'll put my channel 2 to input 1, wherever I have my mic recorded. So good thing to do if you're shooting anything, you want some natural sound. Put one of your inputs, microphone inputs, to an internal microphone, or do a lavalier and also a shotgun if you have someone helping you there. And these are all kind of audio limits, headphone volumes. These are where you can mess around with that. It's very much user-friendly. Take some time with this camera, set it up the way you like it. So when you're ready to shoot, you're just kind of out in the wild and doing what you got to do. Let's go down to our display set menu. Right now we have our histogram on. Love having the histogram on. Let's check this out. So this is this small box here on our menu. So you can see as I dial in the iris here, closing the iris, you can see I'm losing all my values. Think of this as a display. Anything to the left is your dark shadows. If I open way up, you can start to see the values come up. So the light's going more towards the right. Say I was to bump up my ISO, you can see this moving. So if you see all your values way too much to the left or to the right, you know you have to adjust. This is way too underexposed. You can adjust the iris and find something in the middle. Typically you want to find something right in the middle, depending on what your scene is calling for. We're in a darker studio right now, but it looks like we're not losing any data according to the histogram. So it's a great thing to have on your camera. Another thing you guys can use are zebras. Zebras will tell you if anything is overexposed, might want to dial something down. So you guys can see right now we have some zebras on the top of these flowers here. This is the camera's way of saying, hey, these are a little too bright. You might want to dial these down. If we close down our iris a little, you can see those zebras go away. But again, just another tool that you can use to say, hey, maybe I should either flag off this light, move the light so I'm not hitting that so strong, dial down the light. Another great tool to have are these zebras. And it's just kind of another thing, you're working by yourself. You think the shot looks great, you're kind of working on a schedule. Hey, I see some zebras, I got to take an extra second and work on lighting. Peaking is another great tool to help you with focus. So you can see as I turn this on, any highlights that are in focus will turn red, which is cool. Let's see, let's dial down the focus. You can see right now we're out of focus. We don't see any colors. As we start to come into focus, we get some of this peaking color to show us what's in focus. It's not perfectly accurate. I wouldn't super rely on it, but if you're in a pinch, it's super busy, super bright out, you can't really see what you're doing. It's a good tool to have, but you know, it kind of just gives you the highlights that are in focus. Not as strong as your eye, but if you're in a pinch, it's a good tool to have. So that's peaking, another great tool. Markers, just kind of certain things. If you want an aspect ratio guidelines on your frame, you can do that as well. Going throughout this, you have your LCD brightness, display output. Right now I'm on all output because I'm using a monitor. If you're not using a monitor, you can just go right to your LCD or to your eyepiece. These are just display outs that you guys can check out. These last two we're not going to really talk about too much. These are for, you know, you can control a camera aspects of this through Wi-Fi. You can set it to your phone. Not really too many things I would want to use that, except for if you're using an iPad that you want a monitor to, it is possible. The last kind of biggest thing we'll go through is the bottom system menu. This is, we can go into these camera buttons, kind of assigning buttons on the camera. There's a lot of different buttons on the camera that you can assign to do different things. But the biggest thing on this menu is to format our card. So down at the bottom here, you can scroll all the way down, go up a few. We have our media format. Right now we have our memory card in B. So I'm just going to go ahead, format this card. After you do this, you have all your settings set. You format all your media. You don't have any clips. And after this kind of processes, you'll be good to go. So let's give this 4 more seconds, 3 more seconds. It always takes an extra 7. And we'll clear the card. Now our settings are good. We're happy. We're back. We can show you guys, start looking at the camera body itself. So that's kind of it on the menu. Now we can take a look closer at the body of the camera and what it looks like. So really cool looking camera. Right now we have our stock lens on. This is this is an f4, so it doesn't get super sharp, but it's good, very good. It has some good autofocus if you need to shoot a documentary, something like that. But this is an 18mm to a 105, so you do have some good range with this. I definitely recommend using the Rokinon lenses. They're really cool to use. But for looking at the lens itself, you have your zoom option ring here, and your focus ring is here. Fortunately for this stock lens, the iris is controlled on the body of the camera, which isn't great. You can see that these wheels here are set to iris and ND, and they're kind of controlled by this wheel. So again, not ideal, but a good stock lens if you're kind of doing a little run and gun style. So your iris is here, your zoom selection ring is here, and your focus ring is here. We can see we have our LCD screen up here that kind of pivots. You can move it all around, unscrew it a little bit, change the direction what you want to do. If you can see on top here, we have our LCD on. Right now it's on. Say if you turn on your camera and you didn't have an image here, it might be off, which means it's just in the eyepiece. I have to look through the eyepiece here. So if you turn it on, don't panic. It just might be set to the eyepiece because a lot of people prefer to shoot through the eyepiece, which I recommend. Gives you a lot kind of more of a cleaner image. Say you're shooting something and you kind of needing a selfie, kind of rotate for some reason that has this mirror option on the bottom of the LCD, which rotates the image so you can kind of see it from the actor's perspective. So some cool tools there. We have our internal microphone up here. This, of course, is all modular. You can kind of take it apart, move it. There's a handle on this right side. You can kind of move this all around. But we have inputs, audio inputs up here on the right, and audio inputs on the back side. So 2 audio inputs here. The audio is controlled by this flap down. You want to keep this on manual at all times, and you can adjust your levels accordingly with these knobs here. So we talked about our ND. Let me see if I can swing this around. We talked about our ND here. So remember we said it's like kind of like sunglasses. I have the ND set to preset on this selection here. But you can change this to variable and then adjust it by the wheel. I like the preset just because it has some set stops that you can use in the field. So say it's super sunny out and I can't avoid it. I can't do anything else with my lens. I can spin this ND variable to 1. You can see the image gets a lot darker. Okay, now I can open my iris up and get the image that I want. Same with 3. So say you turn on this camera, it's super dark, you can't figure out why. You see all your settings. Hey, maybe the ND was left on by accident. Turn that to clear. Now we know the ND is off. Cool. So ND is off. We also have there is some auto functions to this, so you can do auto iris. If you're shooting by yourself, you're in a pinch, autofocus is here as well. We talked about our ISO and gain as well. So if you hit this button, you can see it turns into automatic. You can see the ISO is changing there. But for the most part, if we ever see A, we want to get rid of that A. So we can see the iris was automatic. The ISO is now not automatic, and we're really in control of what we're shooting and how we're shooting it. So remember we already set up our low, medium, and high, and we scroll through that. We can see the ISO is jumping from 800 to 1000 to our highest at 1600. So we already set up all our work, so we're kind of in the zone right now and we're shooting, we're ready to go. Same with our white balance. We have our A and B, these are presets, so if you had a white piece of paper, typically how you remember, you could white balance it this way. And the white balance button is right on the front here, if you guys can see that. You'd hold that down for a couple seconds. It would white balance and it would go to the appropriate white balance that you'd want of the room. But what I really recommend using is a kind of custom picture profile. So on the bottom where it says preset, this is where you can dial this in and you can use, you can go right into the actual number. Sorry, there we go. And you see when I push that down, it highlights the white balance there. So right now we're at 4500, which is kind of LED. This is why it kind of has a green tinge in here. But if we were to roll this down to 300, 3200, it starts to warm up. And the opposite, we can move this to whatever we think. So this is kind of gives you the option to choose whatever white balance that you want. Right now we have a lot of 3200 lights in here. So this is looking pretty good. We just kind of white balance that knowing the room. Shutter speed again as well. You can see it goes to automatic if you cycle through this button. When you have it highlighted, you can just scroll the wheel here. Since we're shooting in 24 frames per second, we know we want to keep it at the 180-degree rule. So we'll keep that at 48, 1/48. So that looks good. But if you notice that it's kind of moving on you, that probably means it's automatic. Anytime some things are kind of weird and not doing what they want to do, just kind of push that button again. You can set it to whatever setting you want. If you want something more like Saving Private Ryan and you want something really sharp, you can bump up that shutter speed and you can see the shutter is a lot more sharp. But for the most part, you're going to stick to 180-degree rule at 1/48. You guys can see the audio levels are going there. Say if I didn't want anything on my display, I just wanted to see the image pure, you can hit this display option. But for the most part, you want to keep those on so you know what you're seeing. Thumbnail here, we don't have any clips right now, but this is how you'd see your playback. Menu, we talked about how to get through it, but this is how you access it. You roll the wheel all the way down to select your options. You can push in the wheel to choose your selection. On and off buttons here. If we spin this around, we can talk about the SD cards. Like I said, you can record 2 simultaneously. You just push these in, push those out. Let's talk about the battery. So to get the battery out, these batteries are great. It shows you how much charge is left on them by pushing this button. And similar to the charger, these are kind of an in and down. So I'm going into the camera, pushing down, you hear that click. And to get it out, I'm kind of pushing up and pulling out. So in and down, you hear that click. Right now I have an HDMI cord. If you wanted SDI, you'd have that option here as well. This is the side handle, which you can record on. You can move this all around. I'm just kind of holding this button down. Now I can twist it around. I can even take this off if I want. But say you're shooting at a low angle and you're gripping the camera, you can adjust this accordingly. There also is a toggle wheel here that goes through the menu if you prefer to use that. This FN function, this is kind of a in-camera zoom. So if you're getting focus and you just want a quick in zoom, you can hold this. It'll zoom in, adjust your focus, and then let go. You have a record button here as well, another record on top. And we have our microphone stand here, hot shoe here if you ever need. And this is kind of the FS-5. They always come with these Manfrotto beefy tripods, so make sure if you want these Sackler tripods, make sure when you take these out you get the Sackler beefier tripods. Really strong, really good fluid heads on them. You can adjust to whatever kind of function that you need to do. And that's kind of it in terms of the FS-5. I'll show you guys how to change the lens real quick. So right on the front button here, you hold down this button and it's kind of a twist counterclockwise. Whenever you're changing lenses, you always want to cover the sensor, hand this off to your shooting mate, your friend, your crew. They'll grab it with 2 hands, they'll give you a new lens, you'll keep it tight. You see it has this white marker here. We can line this up right here and twist this clockwise. We heard that click. Now we're good. Typically you don't want to change lenses with the cameras on, but that's kind of it. You can move all these parts around. A bunch of different lenses you can use from this camera. I think you guys will really enjoy it. I typically don't like to shoot with this hood on, but good to have, just so you guys know. And so that's kind of it. Thanks guys for watching. Again, Jim O'Connor, if you guys have any questions, but this is the Sony FS-5. Hope you guys enjoyed. I think you guys are going to do some great work with it, and I can't wait to see it. Thanks so much for watching, guys.